Hey, welcome back to the Thatcher Report. Thanks for tuning in. Might get interrupted a few times. We'll see. I guess that's the name of the game when you're a dad or just a human. So, my latest is kind of a twofer. I have two different points I want to communicate about my favorite subject, the Democratic Party. I focus on the Democrats almost exclusively, as you know, because I live in New York and I'm surrounded by Democrats. And apparently, I live in the bluest borough, which is Brooklyn. I see a lot of Mamdani supporters. I see a lot of stickers and flyers all over my neighborhood, which is sort of up and coming on the wrong side of the tracks. I don't know what you want to call it, but it tends to be maybe where it's not that there's anything wrong with it. I like where I live, but it's not a posh, wealthy area. It's mostly a mix of middle class, Black homeowners, slightly lower middle class, working class, Black renters, and then lots and lots and lots of younger white people who can afford the area. And they have their particular type of politics, and you see it everywhere. A lot of trans stuff. That's a big point in a lot of the stickers. Lots of trans issues and clubs and advocacy groups and things like that. There was a trans bookstore, which I think might have closed. I'm not sure. And then Palestine is in Mamdani. Those are all really big issues. Anyway, so I'm kind of surrounded by it. So this is what I talk about because this is called the Thatcher Report, and I'm reporting my Thatcher observations. So something I want to report about is dialogues that I hear from Democrats, and also thinking about, can they win elections? And we're on the cusp of a major election in New York, which the entire country seems to be paying attention to for the mayor. And I want to talk about it before voting day tomorrow. So, what I notice about Democrats, who I now don't feel that I'm a member of anymore. Oh, and apologies, I have a slight cold. What I notice is that they use Trump as a synecdoche for Republicans or even just working class people, whom they often describe as Trumpy. And that's meant to kind of show that they're kind of foreign, they're kind of different, they're Trumpy. That's weird. Now, left wing people taught me to call this othering or using dehumanizing language. But but I guess it's okay if they do it themselves. You just can't do it like to somebody else. Okay. They also will say us and we when they mean Democrats, which kind of drives me nuts. And I'm always like, well, how many people really are Democrats at this point? We're talking like a handful of coastal states and Minnesota, maybe Illinois. And obviously, in the urban areas, I doubt the rest of Illinois is that blue. Certainly, upstate New York is red. So the Democrats are now in this, really shrinking blue bubble. And what I've noticed, and, I'm a victim of this too, or guilty of it too, is a better way to say it, is that they don't really have any contact with Republicans or working class people. No, I have working class people in my family. I have since I've been, I don't know, 11 years old or something. And so I've had a long education with pretty different socioeconomic group than what I grew up in, which is now wealthy suburbs. So I always had that exposure and political conversations and things like that. And obviously now I listen and educate myself a lot from Republican intellectuals. But most Democrats I encounter aren't interested in any of those media sources. They might not have working class family members. If they do deal with working class people, it's to pay them for doing something. They don't actually like hang out and get to talk about politics. And what I hear from a lot of these, so I'm going to say they're sheltered Democrats, is they denigrate Republicans. They'll say that they're in a cult, they're stupid, they're gullible, they're racist, or, some combination of all of this. This does two things. It implicates that the Democrats are superior, and it makes Republican voters undeserving of empathy or just curiosity. They're the enemy. That's all you need to know. When they're assassinated, no big deal. When they get more votes than Democrats, it's not a lesson to learn how to appeal to the voters. It just means it's the end times. Democracy is about to end. The country is going away tomorrow, or maybe the day after tomorrow, or maybe next month. It's never really clear. And, my favorite Democratic explanation, you hear this all the time, is that it's just that Democratic voters are smarter than Republicans. That's really the issue. The RNC are master manipulators. It's Fox News. They manipulate racist rural voters. And, they didn't go to good colleges. If they went to college at all, it's kind of not their fault that they're so stupid and racist. And the RNC manipulates them, or Fox, or some combination of that manipulates them. And a way to prove this is that you'll often hear Democrats say that education is the key to future victories. I think I heard this in some podcast, some congressman or something, a Democrat. And that's just a way of saying people who don't vote for Democrats are dumb. if your whole political observation is that, oh, education would solve the problem, that's you calling people dumb. And I was long taught by my father, and I hope just as a good person, that it's actually you should value and respect voters. If you don't, we really, truly won't have a democracy. But you can't say this to for Democrats. That's just forbidden. It involves compassion and self-awareness, which are not things you really see a lot of in the Democratic Party right now. Obviously, there are Democratic, intellectuals or media players like consultants who get paid to win, and they have to be critical. But outside of that, you just don't hear. I've never heard a Democrat say, most people aren't voting for Democrats, and we should really pay attention to that and think about why. I just don't hear that. Instead, they say, well, Trump is just a monster. He's a fascist. That's all. That's it. And so my mother is a psychotherapist, and she taught me that when a person yells that someone else is a monster, they're often describing themselves. So think about that. And what I also think, as an adjunct to this kind of inability for Democrats to really have political discussions, open, equal, respectful political discussions, is that they insist that democracy is their most sacred value. It's always like no kings, pro-democracy. But what about when voters don't agree with them? Then it's not democracy anymore. It's just crazy. So yeah, we have to have democracy, but only if you agree with me. And so this is not political analysis. If you were listening to the previous iterations of this podcast or read the Substack, I was at this debate about will Zionism have a future on the left? And the people on the left, these are smart people. They just aren't doing political analysis, which is like literally breaking down. Lysis is breaking down something. What they're doing instead is just sports fandom. It's just my team is better than your team. And Republicans are moments away from they're all going to put on ice masks and march in goose step to Hitler. That's I don't know if that's an analysis. I don't know, but it's what they say. And it's like no kings and oligarchy, unless maybe we become the oligarchs. And I don't know, it's not so bad. It's just so funny that the whole thing. I love it. And what also makes me really particularly amused about No Kings is that it's really nobody has commented about the fact that it's kind of hilarious to watch wealthy white people march in the streets demanding more power. I'm like, you guys in Park Slope, which is a wealthy neighborhood, you guys in Park Slope are doing great. I mean, I think it's awesome that you want more power. I mean, I guess God bless you for having so much a will to power. But yeah, I don't know that I'm going to get in line to support you guys in that. So let me just offer a different perspective, and then we'll go back to the how can Democrats actually win. While we don't have kings, it seems kind of obvious. We do actually have an aristocracy in this country, or the secular version, the modern version of an aristocracy, and it comes from our Ivy League plus universities. These graduates, invariably they lead academic institutions, cultural institutions like big fancy museums. They are prominent in the media at all levels, all different types of media, television, print, or which is now web. Uh, these are the graduates that go on to found and lead technology companies, financial institutions, and you'll find them on both sides of the political aisle. Uh, Trump himself went to Penn. These are, and there's like a whole long list of all the fancy schools that all these guys went to. And that's the aristocracy that I see in this country. I don't see anybody marching against that. Now, if Democrats insisted on an end to the Ivy League aristocracy, which most of the country sees as kind of sad victims of their own victim identities, that who are really only out for themselves, then I would really be like, oh, okay, maybe Democrats have some good ideas here. Now, of course, I have to offer the disclaimer that I, in fact, attended one of these institutions for grad school with a nice scholarship. It was awesome. It was like being in a country club, and I had spent my entire life in public schools. Now, the academics, were they that different? No, not really. Was the peer group that different? I would say there was just, it was a smaller school, Stanford University. It was a small graduate program. So it was small and concentrated, but many of the people, not to disparage anybody, but many of the people in my program were not like superstars. None of them few of them have gone on to have like superstar careers. They were just kind of like regular smart people. What was different about going to this country club academia land were the facilities. I mean, they were really, really, really good. And all the computer labs, the gyms, the cafeterias, they were awesome. And the brand recognition. That's what you're paying for. And that's paid tons of dividends. I'm not like some super wealthy person, but I've had a good career. And I'm proud that I went to one of these fancy schools. It directly improved my career prospects, and it was basically free, or it was heavily subsidized. My complaint about the Ivy League aristocracy is not that people get educated to further their careers, if that's relevant to their career path. My complaint is that I just wish there were more ways for Americans to accumulate wealth beyond going to a few select schools. And that's the kind of dialogue I'm not hearing from the No Kings people. I don't hear anything about that at all. I hear this kind of like very angry talk, and like I see, Palestine and Mexico flags. It's just kind of like, and like, very gender ambiguous people who, like my friend says, looks like they came out of a Where's Waldo illustration. It's just kind of like, I don't mean to be mean and ad hominem, but this is not really the crowd that I want to follow. So I think let's talk now about questions that Democrats actually maybe should ask instead. And so I think the aristocracy one is a good one. I think that's a good observation. I'm proud of myself for coming up with that. But here's the big question, right? That I don't see anybody asking, and this is why I'm not going to vote for a Democrat for a long time. They don't say, okay, after running Congress and the White House on and off for about 30 years, and with monopolies in very, very powerful states like California, Illinois, New York, to a lesser degree, Massachusetts, after all of this power of the Democratic Party, what is their track record for helping Americans? I think that's a fair question. Now, of course, you could turn this around. You could ask it of the Republicans. I don't know much about it, in the sense that, yes, I know there are Republicans. I don't live in those states. I don't really know the day-to-day issues in North Carolina. I hear that there's lots of housing being built in North and South Carolina and in Texas. And I know Elon Musk and other business leaders are moving to Texas, and many New Yorkers in my kind of world, or I would say I aspire for those kind of, wealthier Jewish New Yorkers. A lot of them have moved to Florida, non-Jews as well. But because they say it's a better environment for them culturally and economically. So you could ask, the Republicans should ask themselves this question too. But I'm in the Democrat land, and I'm asking, what is their track record? Now, of course, there are some Democrats who are asking this very question. It's not like nobody is. It's the progressives. It's the AOC, Mamdani, Bernie Sanders people are asking these questions. They are rising forth within the shrinking blue bubble, right? They got a bigger slice of a pie, but the pie is shrinking. Now, they have an economic critique. It's painfully relevant. They're right. The economy has just been sucking more and more and more for your average American. If you were born randomly in this country, that's kind of a scary lottery, right? If you weren't born to a certain type of economic class, a certain geography, certain kind of family, cultural benefits, inherit some talk a lot about inherited wealth, or just having, home owning parents. That's probably a factor. If you're just born randomly, it's kind of scary. Progressives are really sharp about observing this. But unfortunately, they discredit themselves and all their, you know, they discredit themselves and how they and that's why they're not very popular. And I go through a lot of ways that they do this. One of them is the trans stuff, right? I don't have to go into at great depth here on the podcast. It's not a popular issue. It's not a popular issue, not because most Americans are evil and hate trans people. It's that the very concept of being trans is kind of suspicious. And then some of the um, modalities for treating the so-called issue of being trans are really disturbing to many, many people. Giving pharmaceuticals to mentally ill children that permanently make them infertile, that's kind of scary. Removing body parts from young people who have this trendy diagnosis, that's really scary. You'll note that the diagnosis is going down. We seem to be over the hump of the mass hysteria of trans, but tell that to somebody who had their breast removed 3 years ago. Not so great. So that's kind of disqualifying of progressives. And I'm passing judgment, but I'm also just observing how voters vote, right? Trump is for Harris is for they, them. Trump is for you. That resonated far beyond the ad buy that it was for. I'm still thinking about it, a year later. It says a lot about how Trump understands the electorate and how Harris didn't. Now, there's other issues that the progressives, like particularly Bernie Sanders, who seems like a smart guy, just undercut himself. He's like pulls the rug out of his own self. So there's trans on the one hand, and there's also the selective vilification of Israel, and by extension, all American Jews. And what are they fighting against? Well, they're fighting this very hard to measure epidemic of Islamophobia, which I don't know about you, not really seeing a lot of Islamophobia. And they have these fantasies about Palestinian freedom. Just as a reminder, this is a region, if you include Iran, with about 500 million Muslims who oppress themselves. That is, when they're not violently attacking Jews, Christians, Druze, other minority groups like Yazidis, gay people, children, women, and then look at the geography when they're not attacking Africans, Europeans, and Americans. So we're like free Palestine, but it's like, okay, let's look at what's happening in that region. It ain't freedom. And going back closer to home, another thing that dooms people, the electoral chances of progressives like a Bernie Sanders, is that they insist on ranking people based on skin color. I've talked a lot about this in the past. All I'm going to say is that the progressive idea is to ignore a person's behavior, capability, or what a famous person with, I noticed a lot of melanin once said, is the content of their character. That progressives are like, no, don't pay attention to that. Just look at the skin color. That tells you everything. Now, happily, and what makes me proud of being an American, or one aspect of being proud of being American, is most Americans don't like racism, right? That's so refreshing. It's so wonderful. It needs to be said over and over again. When Americans vote, they're not voting for racism. Now, we're told Trump voters are racist, which therefore handily makes Democrats the enlightened, non-racist few. And they're only out of power because the Republicans are too stupid and bigoted to recognize Democrats' superior, non-racist views that preach racial preferences. It's like, okay, the Democrats are the not racist, but they say only pay attention to skin color to rank people for opportunities. Okay, that's racism. So the whole thing is really perverse and paradoxical. And the Democrats have painted themselves in a corner. They're never going to get out of it. A majority of voters see right through this, but it's what Democrats tell themselves. I particularly love listening to Black Republican intellectuals and politicians talk about this because they have a really interesting viewpoint that I find incredibly compelling. Now, here's another example of this. I was, as you know, I was at this recent lecture, and one of the very prominent educational leaders, kind of a famous guy, he was making the argument that Claudine Gay, the former president of Harvard, wasn't a diversity hire, and that it's like racist to suggest that. Now, I won't talk any more about that topic other than just to note the qualifier of the word former in her title. So DEI, or, that's kind of a buzzword. Let's just say diversity or multiculturalism. These are measured by the left purely on the basis of race. It used to also be gender. I think that's kind of going away, but skin color, they're never going to get away from skin color. I mean, these guys are stuck. These are the Jim Crow people. Not that they want some of the abhorrent racism of the Jim Crow movement, but they're like mentally in the Jim Crow movement. Like they can't get out of it. And meanwhile, we have like Black Republican politicians. And Black voters are choosing Trump in the Bronx, which is the most Black borough in New York City. And he got like 30% of the vote for the first time ever as a Republican. That's kind of interesting to note. So, but like I said, most Americans reject this. The Supreme Court has rejected it. Even voters in California have rejected it for meaning against affirmative action in higher education. But try telling that tomorrow morning to a Mamdani voter who bravely resists the scourge of Islamophobia by voting for a wealthy secular graduate of Bowdoin College who has famous wealthy parents. I mean, that's really sticking it to the man, you know? And there's, I'll note that Mamdani has had a terrible time with Islamophobia. I mean, the fact that he's young, rich, famous, soon to be most likely the mayor of the biggest city in America, it's a shame. It's a shame how much Islamophobia has held him back from his dreams. Okay. There's one last reason I have to add to, I'm talking about how progressives understand some of the economic issues, but they, then just pull the rug out of them under themselves for all the other stuff. There's another reason, and it's back to the economics, that there's another reason why they don't work well electorally, in my opinion, is that their solutions to income inequality are higher taxes and more government, which they model after Western European countries. They're very open about this. I grew up hearing about this in like the 80s and, oh, it's so much greater in Scandinavia. It's like Sweden has like 5 million people. And up until recently, they were mostly all Swedish people and they all are Christian. It's like, of course they get along. They're all kind of the same and there's not a lot of them. So, they're going to have solidarity. That's like that in Japan too, which is much bigger place, but pretty darn purely Japanese. And they have very low crime. So, and they probably have better, healthcare. But in any event, the progressives in America talk about Western Europe. All right, let's talk about Western Europe just really briefly. You know, I'll notice that the word, okay, I make a couple of jokes about this in the essay. I don't think it's going to translate in the podcast, but what's happening in Europe right now? Well, their response to being invaded is to have a conference. That's how they're doing over there. So just ask the next Muslim terrorist or the entire Russian military why, when they think of Europe, their next thought is yum. Europe cannot protect itself either internally. They're always getting attacked. It seems, thank God there are fewer guns in their society. Can you imagine that? It'd be a bloodbath. It'd be more of a bloodbath. But seriously, they had these horrible bombings in Paris and England at venues from ISIS terrorists. And they had the attack against Israelis in Amsterdam after a soccer match from young Muslim. I don't know that they're young, but from Muslim male immigrants. Europe is not, and then of course they have no response to Ukraine being invaded by Russia twice. It's now Russia took the Crimea, and now it's taking the eastern regions of Ukraine. And what is the EU doing about it? What's their muscular response? Have a meeting? come crying to America. So I think that's a little sobering for Americans, and they don't want to be like that. They also note, I think American voters are smart. And while maybe a handful of progressives talk about how great Europe is, let's talk about innovation. Where to the new electric cars, where to software, the biggest movies, pop music, emerging media platforms like podcasts, AI, financial instruments, robotic manufacturing techniques. Where is that all coming from? It's not coming from Spain or Germany. It's coming from the USA and China. So democratic socialists point to Europe while the rest of the world drools after Wall Street, Silicon Valley, Beijing, and Guangzhou, if that's how you pronounce it. But those are some of the industrial areas of obviously the political leadership and industrial areas of China. And that's where the leadership is. You got to look to America, and unfortunately, you got to look to China. I think maybe Belgium is low on the list. All right. So the progressives have a way of critiquing the economy that's very effective within the blue bubble, but they don't have any other viewpoints that attract more voters. That's my argument there. Now, I think all blue state voters, forget about the progressives, just cast a big wide net. I think they should ask a couple of questions of their party, which they don't do. And therefore, I don't think the party is going to go anywhere. But let's see how I'm going to do this, because I have this laid a little interestingly in the essay. Let's just tackle some big questions. Did the Affordable Care Act make care more affordable? Do high tax states like New York, California, Massachusetts have world-class infrastructure and really amazing public safety track record? Do Democrats have ideas for tackling utility rates, transportation and housing costs, less biased pedagogy in the school system, and negotiating secure borders? Now, a bonus question: if democracy means leaders are, let me say that again. I got a little tongue-tied. The bonus question is, if democracy means leaders are accountable to voters, who was accountable when Biden wasn't capable of being president? That's the most troubling question I can think of posing about a democracy, is if the leader is incapacitated, which obviously he was for some unknown amounts of time, because funnily enough, the media doesn't report about it, who was in charge? And the question answers itself, that whoever that person was or group of people, they were not accountable to the voters. And that's truly terrifying if you believe in democracy, because that's no longer a democracy. That's a coup. That's something else. Now, thankfully, it was temporary, and I'm glad Trump, obviously wiped the slate clean. Any Republican would, anybody from the opposing party, but pretty crazy. Okay, did the Affordable Care Act make care more affordable? Now, there's a big debate right now with the government shutdown about Obamacare subsidies. Just to remind you, those subsidies from the federal government, meaning from our tax dollars, go to private insurers, not to you. Okay, so that's the Obamacare, or the ACA, is taking tax dollars and giving them to insurers. So either you pay the insurers out of pocket, which you do, or you pay taxes to them, or in under Obamacare, it's both. That's the shittiest part. Sorry for swearing, but that's the most awful political policy I can imagine, right? That's what we have. Meanwhile, okay, so we had ACA when Obama was president. How are your health insurance rates? Are they going up or down? What is it like in New York, which I know best? We have very few hospital networks now. We have Mount Sinai, we have a couple of Northwell, we have a couple of other ones. They've gobbled up all these clinics and hospitals, and guess what? They raised the fees. What are Democrats doing about that? What Democrats say is, if you criticize Obama, you're a racist. Okay. And then progressives say, if you think taxes are high now, imagine Medicare for all. It's like, oh, this is awesome. All right. So I live in a high tax state. You yourself listening to this most likely live in a very high tax state. How's the infrastructure and public safety? How are the public services? Is going to the DMV, does that just take like 5 seconds to get your driver's license renewed? Um, now, there are actually people in the Democratic Party talking about this, right? There's two of them. Their spokesman, which is my way of saying a New York Times and Atlantic monthly journalist. They're Democratic Party spokespeople, propagandists. They wrote a book this year called Abundance, which calls for fewer regulations. But now no one remembers who wrote it. Okay, moving on. Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of End the Oligarchy and Mamdani fans demand freebies. And basically, okay, you want a free bus, you want free schools, you want free everything. Well, their way of paying for it is financial NIMBYism, not in my backyard. So they're like, well, don't tax us, just tax other people. That's their response. Now, luckily for them, because they believe in racially pure identities and gender identities, the other people that the progressives want to tax are wealthy, patriarchal, pro-Israel, usually straight, white, male supremacists. So it's okay to tax them. That's fine. That that's that's the answer for living in a high tax state. Just have more taxes. Okay, that's literally what Mamdani is running on: is increasing taxes in the highest tax state and municipality in the country. Um, Now, there's a lot of other issues we're dealing with. Utility rates, electricity costs are going up. Transportation is more expensive. Cars cost too much. Gas has actually gone down with Trump. I'm noticing some of the car costs have come down a little bit with the tariffs. We were told that wouldn't happen, but it is. But they're basically very high. Housing is through the roof. That hasn't budged. And we have really bizarre pedagogy in our public school systems. And then Democrats obviously were struggling with secure borders. So that's a lot. That's a mouthful. Let's just say that I'm not seeing any really good ideas for lowering my electricity bill coming from a Democrat. I'm not seeing any good ideas for making housing more affordable. I pay a lot of, taxes and fees and things like that, and code issues, but I still have to uh, defend my basement against sewers backing into it because the sewers don't work correctly in New York. That strikes me as a problem. And, the progressives talk about affordability. That's obviously what's helped Trump in 2024. It's helping Mamdani in 2025. So where's Gavin Newsom on this? He just said he's going to run for president. Oh, right. He's in California, where a 2-bedroom house costs about $2 million. And when it burns down, you're not allowed to rebuild it. All right. That's his idea for it. And then public schools, the pedagogy is crazy. They got rid of phonics, so now kids can't read very well. Obviously, there was the whole COVID situation where they closed down the schools for 2 years, which I honestly is a crime against humanity, and I wish people were in jail for doing that. It's so insane. And then, meanwhile, at the college level, liberal arts educations have just become a bad joke about a queer pro-Palestinian vegan solving climate change with a land acknowledgement before screaming at the Jews. I mean, that's what you're getting out of the universities. Unfortunately, that doesn't help you get a job. And then immigration, that's a really easy one. Democrats either have no solution or demand open borders. Voters have rejected both. So to kind of wrap it up, I know I've been talking for a while. If the Democratic Party or their voting members were to ask some of these questions, like let's just say about Obamacare, and think about maybe some of its failures, I think they would honestly attract more votes. But if they double down on trans Islamophobia and tax increases, they should buy some brooms because they're going to need them at the dustbin of history. They're just, who's going to vote for this? Now, Mamdani is going to win, most likely, but I don't think it's going to play very well at the state level. So if you're with me that critical thinking is a key to making democracy works, you got to keep asking more questions. Why is it that, do you think that the big famous media entities you probably no longer rely on anymore, like let's say the New York Times, the Atlantic, the New Yorker, broadcast news, other sources, NPR, Do you honestly believe that they report events objectively so you can make informed, independent decisions? Or, more likely, do they reflect a narrow ideological bias that elevates confirmation over elucidation? A couple more questions. If Trump is authoritarian, does that mean regular Democrats enjoy more freedoms than Republicans? This is something I think of a lot. So, if you know me or if you're new to this, I'm sort of religious. There's different ways of talking about it in Judaism, conservadox, something like that. I'm Jewish, clearly. I'm heterosexual. I'm considered white in this country. I am a male, and I live in Brooklyn. Now, I am policed routinely for sharing my thoughts on trans, DEI, Israel, Islam, and taxation. Is that the freedom that I should be enjoying as living in a Democratic majority city? Doesn't really feel like it. There's really not a lot of I think there might have been 30 years ago, but there's not a lot of intellectual curiosity in Democratic circles. There's certainly no tolerance for dissent. It's just us or them. So I think until Democratic voters are ready to take responsibility for their party, college grads will go up to the Columbia campus and chant "No Kings," and they're going to elect Mamdani for mayor. But at Columbia University, the janitors and cafeteria workers are going to be voting for Elise Stefanik for governor next year. That's what I think is going to happen. Just as a quick aside for people who might not be into all the inside baseball, Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, who also went to one of these Ivy League aristocracy factories. She's a congresswoman. She was passed over for ambassador to the UN because Mike Johnson needs to keep as many Republicans in Congress as possible because they have such a narrow majority. The talk is that she's going to run for governor. If Mamdani wins tomorrow night, I think it basically guarantees that Elise Stefanik will become governor. You can't really predict politics, so I could be eating my words, but that's what I think is likely to happen. And the governor of New York is very powerful compared to the mayor. The mayor has lots of responsibilities, but not a lot of power. So I just think that's a vote for Mamdani. Great, because I'm going to get a Republican governor, which we badly need. So my ultimate point is that the Democrats are a narrow party in a wide country. So thank you so much for listening. I appreciate your time, your patience, and I hope that you follow me on Substack. It is Thatcher Report, THACHER. Thanks so much. Take care.